Morning, everybody. We are going to get started. It is 10 o'clock Pacific time, so we're ready to go. And I want to thank all of you for joining today, wherever you are in the world. We're delighted to have you. My name is Jennifer Morris, and I'm with Madcap Software. I am beyond excited to welcome Daniel Ferguson today. He's the founder of Smart Output. So Daniel has been in the tech comm and project management world for over 20 years. He's been a Flare user since our early days. He presents regularly at industry conferences, including our own learning conference, MadWorld. He is a certified advanced Flare developer, and a trainer, and someone I personally have learned so much from over the years. And so I'm so happy, Daniel, that you're here today sharing your knowledge with all of us. So if you are new to using Flare, or if you're considering adopting Flare to manage your content more intelligently, and you're new to concepts like single sourcing, content reuse, collaborative authoring, etc., then you are in the right place. And I think you will really enjoy this next hour. So welcome, Daniel. Thank you so much for taking the time with all of us today. And as always, we have a lot to cover. So 2 quick items of business before I turn it over. Number 1, this webinar will be recorded. And so if for whatever reason you have to jump out early, no problem. We will send a link to the recording to everybody when it's all done and rendered. There's also a questions panel in the GoToWebinar console area there. So I would encourage all of you to pop your questions in there if you're curious about something as Daniel's going on. When we get to the end, we're going to do our best to get to as many questions as we can. But whatever we don't get to live, we'll follow up with the question and answer document. So keep the questions coming, and we'll be sure to get all of that back to you at the end. So again, so much to cover today. Daniel, thanks again for joining us, and I know you are ready to get started. So I'm going to go ahead and turn everything over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for that extremely kind introduction. And good morning or good afternoon or good evening to you, everybody on the webinar today, wherever you may be. Thanks for joining. It's always such a great experience for me to be here and to do these webinars, because I always get to connect with people afterwards who have questions or who just want to, I don't know, just want to connect. In fact, I'm having a little trouble with my slide deck here, so give me just a second. Are you, Jennifer, Marissa, are you able to see my slides?
Yep, I can see everything. And yeah.
Okay, good, thank you. So just a little bit of an introduction here. Jennifer covered most of it, but I am a Flare consultant and trainer primarily, and a technical writer. I use Flare every single day. I train people on it, I consult with people on it. I also author in it, just like most of you, or at least some of you do. And so I have been using Flare for years. And when I first started using Flare back a number of years ago, it was a complete career revitalization for me. It really changed me as a technical writer, because all of a sudden I had at my disposal, at my fingertips, the tool I needed to be able to deliver the output that, first of all, my customers needed, and secondly, my bosses were happy with. And so honestly, if it weren't for Flare, I don't know if I would have stayed in tech writing, but here I am. And so here's my contact information. I would love to connect with you. Feel free to send me an email or let's connect on LinkedIn. And so that's a little bit about me. Now, what are we going to be talking about today? So first of all, this presentation that I'm giving today is actually a repeat of one that I gave about 5.5 years ago. And that presentation from 5.5 years ago has been viewed many, many, many times. And so we're refreshing it. I refreshed it here a little bit with some of the new things that weren't available 5 years ago. And that's what we're going through today. And this is a presentation that introduces you to some of the key features and functionalities in Flare that address the needs that tech writers face today in our community. This isn't a presentation about how to do all this stuff. This is a presentation about how Flare does the stuff that tech writers need. And I'm going to walk through that with some images and some animations and so forth to show how Flare does single sourcing, for example, how it does multi-channel output and what you can do with it, what the collaborative authoring features are. And these three things, like when I start working with a new client, I always ask them, hey, why did you pick Flare? Like what was it about Flare that attracted you to adopt Flare as your authoring tool? Many of the customers I work with are migrating from a different authoring environment into Flare. And probably 90% of the time, it's one of these three or a combination of these three. You know, they like, well, we really needed some single sourcing capability, some advanced single sourcing capability, or, you know, we need to deliver PDF and HTML. Or every now and again, I'll get somebody that says, yeah, we got a chum file we need to deliver too, right? Or, you know, our authoring process is a bit clunky and we're looking to kind of streamline that a little bit, and we liked what Flare had to offer in that standpoint. Every now and again, I'll get somebody that wants something else that Flare can do, maybe some advanced CSS type stuff or being able to do their own JavaScript, that sort of thing. But these ones, in my experience, are the big hitters. And so if you're in a place right now where you're wondering, hey, is Flare the right thing for our company? Or if you're using Flare, maybe you're already in it and you're wondering, am I using this capability that's there? Am I using it correctly? Am I seeing everything that's available at my fingertips to use? I think this is going to be a great presentation for you. Now, because I'm not going to get into the how-to of everything today, what I'm going to do is when you receive this slide deck after the fact, there's going to be some reference material at the back of the slide deck with some links to additional webinars or other presentations or articles or so forth that give you, you know, how-to instructions. For example, if you want to use snippet conditions, which we're going to talk about here in just a minute, well, how do you go do that? You'll have that reference material in the slide deck. And so you'll have a path. It's just that if I tried to include all that in this presentation, we would be here until next week. So I condensed it a little bit. So that's what we're going to be covering today. Now, I want to level set on some definitions of some terms that I'm going to be using a lot in this presentation. If you've already used Flare, these three terms are terms you're probably quite familiar with. If you're not, well, then maybe some of these you're familiar with and maybe others you're not, and maybe they have a slightly different definition in the Flare context. So the first is a topic. Now, in the tech writing industry, topic-based authoring is definitely a philosophy that's grabbed hold, and Flare is a topic-based authoring tool. That's what it is. And the topics in Flare is where your content is. So Flare topics house all of your content. And a Flare project can have as few as just a couple, or it can have many thousands of topics, as many as you need. I've worked in all sizes of Flare projects. Then there's within Flare a file type called a TOC. A TOC is a file that you use to organize your topics in. So you've got all these topics in your project. Let's just say you have 100. And then you need to organize those into some sort of a navigational hierarchy. Well, that's what a TOC file is for, where you take your topics, you're like, okay, I want them in this order, I want them nested in this way, and that's a TOC file. And then lastly, we have a file type in Flare called a target. A target is an instance of an output type. So what a target file does, it is the bridge between your Flare source files and usable, publishable output. So when you build a target file, and that's another phrase I'm going to use a lot, is building. When you build a target file, it compiles the output into a PDF or an HTML site or a chum file or a bunch of other types of deliverables, which I'll cover here in just a bit. And it converts that into something that's usable. And so topics, TOCs, and targets. These really, in my experience and in working with Flare for so long, these are the foundational elements of Flare, these three file types. There's a bunch of others as you get into it, but these ones really, if you don't have one of these three, then you really don't have a Flare project in most cases. So I wanted to go over those definitions before I get into talking through all my content, just so there's an understanding of what I'm talking about when I talk about a TOC or a target or building a target. So now you know. So let's jump into here, and we're going to start by talking about single sourcing. Now, what is single sourcing? Well, quite simply, it's the practice of reusing common content throughout your documentation deliverable, no matter how big or little it is. And the reason why people use it is because it decreases authoring time, right? Because maybe you just write something once and reuse it a dozen times. It reduces the likelihood for error, and it reduces cost. And this third bullet is the biggest one in my opinion, reduces cost and complexity of ongoing maintenance. I can't tell you how many situations I've been in where I'm working as an author and I have set up my project to use some single sourcing capability. So I'm reusing a chunk of content in more than one place, and I get a comment from somebody saying, hey, this piece of documentation needs to be updated. It's out of date, or for the next release, we're adding a new feature. We need to do this, that, or the other, or there's going to be a new step here in this procedure. And I say, okay, great. Jump over into Flare. I go to update it and look at it, and it's like, oh, this piece of content is used in more than one place. I wonder if those other places need to be updated as well, right? And then I can go back to my subject matter expert and say, hey, what about these other contexts? Is it also going to apply there? And so you can see how using single sourcing can really help you keep your overall documentation deliverable more up to date. And you have, like if you use it, your documentation doesn't fall into a state of disrepair because you're being wise with how you're using your single sourcing. So Flare has all kinds of single sourcing capabilities. We're going to talk about the ones in these bullets today. And you can use these, all of these in your project. You can even combine them in very creative and cool ways to achieve single sourcing in your project. So let's start by talking about condition tags. In Flare, a condition tag is something that you can place on any topic or any content within a topic, right? And then you can specify at the target level whether the content or topics tagged with that condition is in or out when you build the target. So let's look at this example here. And all the examples I'm giving you today are real. These are all real things that I have worked on over the course of the past number of years since I've been working as a Flare consultant. They're all real life scenarios. So I've got a company that develops a product with two different models. This particular company was actually a movie theater company, and they installed movie theater or like projector and sound systems, of course, in their theaters. And they had a couple of different models. And the maintenance procedures for these two models varied, although there was a ton of overlap. Probably like 75, 80% of the content between the two models was identical, right? So what I did is the first thing in Flare is I went and I created a condition tag set. It's an actual file type in Flare, and I said, okay, we have a model A and we've got a model B. Next, I went through and in my content, I tagged files in the TOC that were specific to one model or the other. Maybe replacing the bulb in the two different types of projectors, maybe that procedure was a little bit different. And so in model A, I needed one set of content to show up for replacing the bulb. And in model B, I needed another set of content to show up for replacing the bulb. Even though maybe some of the conceptual and timing and things like that, some of the other content would have been exactly the same. So I can tag files right there in my TOC that are model specific. But not only that, I can tag information within my topics that are model specific. Maybe if we're looking down here at the bottom of my screenshot here where I've got this example and you see there's two images, image one may have been, well, is in this case an image of model B, and That second image is an image of model A. And when I build the output that somebody's going to use, I only want one of those to show up, not both, right? Just one. And so I tag them as such. But the cool thing is when I'm doing my authoring, my maintenance, like let's say a year down the road, this needs to be updated, I come into my source file and I, as the author, see all the content, right? I've got a much better vision into what's going on in my content as opposed to having this content in two separate files that I'm maintaining. It's all in one place. And I know in the output that only pieces are going to get built into each target, but from an authoring standpoint, I see it all. So then I've got my targets created, or my conditions created, my condition tag set. I've got my files in my TOC condition, my content conditioned. I'm ready to build my targets. So I'm going to have a model A target because I want a model A specific output, and I'm going to have a model B target because I want a model B specific target as well. And in model A, I'm going to exclude model B content. And in model B, I'm going to do the inverse. I'm going to exclude model A content. And when I build my output, I get two specific help systems, one for model A and one for model B. They've got their own TOCs. By the way, the TOC becomes the navigation. I should have clarified that. The TOC file in Flare becomes your navigation in your Flare output. So I've got specific TOC navigation and specific content for my different models. Now you can use conditions in all kinds of ways. This is a simple example of two models. You could use it if you have variations between regions, or if you have content that you want to show up in print and not online, or the other way around. You know, there's all kinds of ways that you can use conditions in Flare. And this is extremely powerful, very useful single sourcing feature, conditional tagging. Now let's look at snippets. A snippet is another type of file in Flare that enables single sourcing. So with snippets, you write once and you use that content multiple times. The purpose of a snippet is to be inserted into multiple topics. They can be short as a sentence, or I've even seen people use snippets for like product names. So they could be things like that. They can be huge. You know, they could be pages and pages. They could have tables. They can have images. Anything you can put in a topic, you can put in a snippet. And if you're going to use a piece of content in more than one place, in more than one topic, then it's a good idea to put it in a snippet. This is what enabled me when somebody said, or enables me to this day, when somebody says, hey, we need to go update this. And I go into my topic and I say, oh, that's in a snippet. I better go ask about these other instances of it. That's why, it's because of snippets. So to use the way Flare uses snippet files, first of all, you would create your snippet file. And in this example, I've got a set of identical steps that need to be used in more than one procedure. And I want these steps to show up right in the procedure for everywhere where they need to use them. I don't want to say, hey, go reference this for your first 3 steps or whatever. Furthermore, these first 3 steps might not be steps 1, 2, and 3 in every procedure. Maybe they show up in a different order or in a different place in separate different procedures. So I've got this snippet file that's got a set of 3 steps, and these 3 steps need to be reused in multiple places. So I then take my snippet file and I insert it into the topics where this content needs to be reused. In this example, I've put it into 3 topics. And in topics 1 and 2, they are steps 1, 2, and 3. It looks like in topic 3, they're actually steps 2, 3, and 4. So I insert the snippet everywhere where I need to reuse that content. I then build my target. And when the target is built, the content shows up in the topics, right where I put it. Steps 1, 2, and 3 in topic 1, steps 1, 2, and 3 in topic 2, and steps 2, 3, and 4 in topic 3. And they get built right into the output code, right? And so it's single sourced in my source where I want it to be single sourced, but when I build the output, it's built right into those topics. Now with this, when somebody says you need to update step 2, well, it's very clear to me. what I'm looking at here. And I'm not in the situation where if I go update step 2 in topic 1, that I'm blind to the fact that topic 2 and topic 3 also may need updating. Because I've single sourced, I have visibility into that. This really, really helps when maintaining your documentation long term. Like I said, it reduces complexity and it reduces cost because it reduces the likelihood for error. And I've seen this time and again when working with teams where they've copied and pasted information, and over the years, it just starts to fall apart because people don't know where all their content is used. Well, with single sourcing, you know, and you have visibility into that. Now, there's a really cool single sourcing feature in Flare called snippet conditions, where we kind of combine snippets and conditions. I'll be honest, it took me a while to understand what this actually did because I didn't have a use case for it. But then one time I had a project come through, and in this case, I was working on it with a company on an SDK programming guide worth 1 TOC, but they wanted an iOS section and an Android section in their single SDK programming guide. That was their request. Just one SDK programming guide with these two sections. Well, as you can imagine, there was a lot of conceptual overlap between these two. And the key here was that they all wanted it in 1 TOC, and that's where the snippet conditions really came into play. So with the snippet conditions in this particular project, what I did is I created a snippet file, just the same type as in the previous slide, just a straight up condition file, a snippet file rather. And in this snippet file, I had common content that applied to both Android and iOS, but then the steps for accomplishing what I had just described in the conceptual part were different, of course, between these two interfaces, these two different operating systems. So I had iOS steps and I had Android steps. Now I had created a condition tag set. And in the condition tag set, I had iOS only and I had Android only. And then within my snippet, I tagged the iOS content with the iOS condition and I tagged the Android content with the Android condition. It's all in one topic, or one snippet rather, so I have it all in one place. I, as the author, see it all. It's all there. But some of it I know is going to go into the iOS section and some just into the Android section. So I've got this snippet file with conditioned content in it. I then take my snippet file and I inserted that snippet into two topics. One in the iOS section, the other in the Android section. Remember, they wanted one deliverable for both of their operating systems. They didn't want two deliverables. They didn't want an iOS guide and an Android guide. They wanted an SDK programming guide with all of the information in one. So I put this snippet in two topics that were in the same TOC. Then I applied snippet conditions to the topics. So for my iOS topic, I said, you know what, I just want to include iOS information and common information. So include the common goes through by default, right? And then for snippet conditioned content, include just the iOS. And then in my Android topic, I did just the opposite. You know, the common content goes through by default, and then I just want the Android content in this one. So when I built my output, I had two topics in the same TOC, in the same guide, where I was able to deliver just the content that applied in that particular topic. So once I understood what snippet conditions did, it opened up a whole new world for me because it allows you to apply conditions at a more granular level than at the target level. You can actually use conditions within the same TOC, right? Topics in the same TOC to deliver different output. I now use snippet conditions all the time. I'm constantly applying snippet conditions, probably because most of the content I work with has a pretty big TOC, really big TOC for our HTML deliverable. And so we use snippet conditions regularly. So those are snippet conditions. If you've had a need for snippet conditions before and you didn't know this existed, I suspect you're having all kinds of light bulbs go off in your head right now. I've seen that a lot of times working with people. This is a very cool feature to be able to use this. Okay, continuing on with our single sourcing conversation here, let's talk for a minute just about variables. I love variables. Variables conceptually are similar to snippets in that they're a single piece of content that you want to reuse in multiple places, but they're typically shorter. Like I talked about how a snippet, you could put anything you want in it. Variables, you can't. Variable is text. And it's really useful for things like product names, trademark product names, interface terminology, contact phone numbers, these types of things, where you can put in a variable, and you can use that variable in as many of your topics as you need. I'm sorry, give me just a second. So let me walk through, sorry about that break, had a little bit of an interruption here. So variables are, like I said, shorter pieces of information you can reuse in your topics. But what I love about variables is that you can reset the variable resolution in the target. So in this example, we have a company, and I've changed the company's name here. They create a series of amplifiers, and they sell two different products, G2 and G4, in the US and in the UK. I have simplified this a little bit for the purpose of this demonstration. And so what we did, I went in and we created a variables file. And in this example, I've got three variables. I've got a series variable, and I've got a product variable, and I've got a phone variable. Now the series variable, I set the definition to Z Audio because that's the name of this product line, is Z Audio. But then I've got a product variable and a phone variable because I have different product lines and different phone contact numbers that I want to be able to present in my output. So I create the variables file, and then in my content, into the applicable source file, and in this case, it'd be like a contact file or a contact topic. I author my content, like, do you need more help with your, and then I stick my series variable in there. This is really nice because if we ever change the name of our series, I can just go into the variables file and update it. Then I put the product variable in there, and the resolution for that's either going to be G2 or G4. Those are my two product lines. And I'm going to set that resolution in the target. And then I have a contact phone number variable in here, which I'm also going to set in the target. So I put that, create my variables file, author my content, put my variables into the content. And when I build my targets, I've actually got 4 targets. I've got one for each product in each location. So when I build USG2, for example, in the actual target, I'm going to say, okay, when I build this target, I want the product variable to resolve to G2, and I want the phone variable to resolve to this phone number. The series variable, I'm going to leave that one alone. Just go ahead and define that one as it is or use the definition that's in the variables file. So when I build it, this is the sentence I get for this target. In my UK G2 target, this is the sentence I get because I've set a different variable definition for my phone number. It's a different phone number in the UK as it is in the US, for example. The product still resolves to G2 because it's the same product. And likewise, this carries through all of my product lines. So I can have these 4 targets that, using variables and being able to reset the variable definition in the target, allows me to have 4 different sentences appear, even though in my content it's just one. It's just one sentence. This is super, super useful. Where I find this used all the time is on page layouts, if you're familiar with page layouts. Running headers and footers. Like, let's say you create a book title variable and you want to use a page layout for your PDF output in multiple PDF outputs, but you want, of course, to have different titles, different book title, different running headers and footers and so forth like that to adjust based on what the target you're building. You can create a book title variable. You can stick it on your title page and in your running header and footer, and then in each of your PDF targets, you can set what that variable definition should be. And then that allows you to just have one page layout for all of your PDF outputs. Really, really nice. This is variables are a great single sourcing feature. So that's in a nutshell how they work. Okay, multiple TOCs and targets. We talked about how you have a TOC file in Flare, but you're not restricted to one TOC file. You can have, as far as I know, as many as you want. I've seen Flare projects that have a couple hundred TOC files in them. And you can reuse your topics in as many TOCs as you need to. So in this example, which is very common, we have a need to create a simple getting started print guide, but a comprehensive HTML site. This is extremely common where people want to build all of their content into an HTML site, but they want standalone PDFs for individual modules. And in this case, I've just picked getting started. So what we'd have here is we would author our content in Flare, and in this case, I've got 4 topics, right? And then I create multiple TOC files. I've got a getting started TOC, and I've got my HTML site TOC. And in my getting started TOC, I may just use topics 1 and 2. That may be all that applies to getting started. So I put those 2 topics in my getting started TOC, whereas in my HTML site TOC, I want all of it. I want the getting started and additional information. So I take all of my content and I stick it in my TOC. Now I should also add here, if I had topic 5, I don't have to put topic 5 anywhere. You can have topics that aren't in a TOC. So you can be working on content, authoring content and so forth in topics and not necessarily have to put it in a TOC if you don't want it to. But in this case, I'm using all my topics, and topics 1 and 2 are used in 2 TOCs. I then have 2 targets, because remember, a target represents a deliverable output. So in this case, I've got a getting started PDF target and I've got my HTML target. And when I built these in my getting started PDF, I'm going to see only topics 1 and 2, whereas in my comprehensive HTML site, I'm going to see all of it. This is really, really common to have multiple TOCs in a Flare project and thereby multiple targets. And we're going to talk about this a little bit more when I talk in just a few minutes here about multi-channel publishing. Okay, so that's multiple TOCs and targets. Makes it very, very flexible. And I should point out one thing in terms of maintainability. In this case, like topic 1 and 2 is reused. Well, Flare gives you visibility through its link viewer to see where topics are used. So I could come in and somebody says, hey, we need to update topic 2. I can use the link viewer and say, well, topic 2 is used in 3 places. So let's go look at those other places too. Do they all need to be updated? If they do, great. I'll update the topic. It gets built into all my deliverables. If not, well, then I'll need to create a new topic. And maybe some of the content in that topic needs to be snippetized, so to speak. And I can use, single sourcing that way. There's just all kinds of single sourcing avenues within Flare for you to use. All right, finally here in the single sourcing section, I'm going to touch on global project linking. I get a lot of questions about global project linking. Should I use it or not? And that's a case-by-case question, because what you can accomplish with global project linking, you can also accomplish using just a single Flare project. But sometimes there are reasonable justifications to go ahead and use global project linking. In fact, I set this up for a client just last week because it was the right thing to do. So let me explain to you how it works and what it does, and then you can decide if this is something that would be useful to you or not. So in this example, I've got 3 three projects. I've got on the left Flare Project 1 and Flare Project 2. These are projects from which I build deliverables. I build the output. And then I've got a project that I have designated as a global Flare project. Now, there's no like global Flare project type. It's just a regular Flare project. What makes it a global project is that I have decided that there's content or files in that project that I want to reuse in other projects. That's how it becomes the global, is I just decide that it is, and that's where I put the content. And in this case, I've got three files. I've got a style sheet, a master page, and a skin file. And we haven't talked anything about these files, but all three of these files have to do with stylistic or styling HTML output. They determine what HTML output looks like and what's on the page and kind of form a template. So let's say I want to share this template, these template files among multiple Flare projects, Flare Project 1 and Flare Project 2. Well, in each of these projects, what I do is I go create what's called an import file. And the import file has two roles in life. It points to the project from which you want to pull files, and it specifies which files to pull. That's what an import file does. There's a few other checkboxes and things in there, but at a very high level, that's what you do. You create an import file and say, okay, import file, I want you to go to that project, and I want you to get these three files, and I want you to make copies of them and put them into my project so that I can use those files too. And so these import files point to my global Flare project, and I set that up. As the Flare author, I set that up. I say, okay, here's the project that I want you to get stuff from, and here are the three files that I want you to grab, okay? And then when I run the import file, and there's two ways to do it. I can do it manually by either clicking in Flare and saying import, or I can have it run as part of my target build. So I kick off a target build, and the first thing it does is it goes and checks with the global project and gets the latest and greatest files from the global project, but it pulls copies of those files into my child projects. It doesn't just reference them. It actually copies them and puts those copies of those files in my project, but it creates a link to them. They're linked. And in fact, if I go try to edit these files in Flare Project 1 or 2, I get a warning in Flare that says, hey, you're about to edit a file here that's linked. And are you sure you want to do this? Because once you break the link, then it's not linked back to the global project anymore. Now, if I go into the global project and I update any one of these files, I can pull those files again into my child project. Now, one of the things that causes some confusion with the global project linking is it is a pull operation from the children projects. It's not a push operation from the global project, right? So you can't push from global into the children. It's a pull from the children from the global into the child projects. Really, really useful this is in certain situations. I would say most people that I work with don't do this because they're able to accomplish what they want to accomplish just using multiple targets in a single Flare project. But sometimes we do need to use this. Sometimes different projects are on different release schedules and they've got some Git branching that they need to manage, and it makes more sense to have different projects. Or sometimes people have huge projects and they want to break them up, right? And to make them more manageable, and sometimes it makes sense to do that, but you still need to share some of these infrastructure type files. And in those cases, we'll set up a global project linking to work for them. All right, so that is an overview of Flare's single sourcing capability. I hope that as you watch that, most of Flare's single sourcing capability, I hope that as you watch that, you got some ideas about what might work for you, and some ideas in your situation about how some of these features may help you as you manage your content and deliver user help material for your customers. All right, so let's move on. I'm going to touch on multi-channel publishing here. So we just talked about managing or single sourcing your content. Multi-channel publishing is related, but a little bit different. And I touched on some multi-channel publishing concepts earlier. So multi-channel publishing is the capability, what this is it allows you to publish your documentation output to many different output formats from a single Flare project. And I've listed the output types here that are available. You can see there's a lot of them. And so you work in your Flare source files, and then when you create a target file, you specify which of these it should build. Now the connector to Salesforce and Zendesk, those are not target types, but there are connectors that allow you to publish Flare authored content into Salesforce and Zendesk. But the rest of these are all target types where you can build this type of output from Flare. Now, why do this? Well, sometimes various formats are needed for your audience, and you can deliver these different format types at very little incremental cost. Just a few months, well, 3-4 months ago, I had somebody come to me and say, hey, can we deliver a chum file? Still in 2019. And we already had all the content. So I said, yeah, we can deliver a chum file. It's just a matter of setting up a target, maybe reworking some style sheet things a little bit, but we can deliver a chum file, sure. And so I was able to do that because of multi-channel publishing. Now, Flare allows you to create, as I mentioned, multiple targets and designate the output type for each target. Sometimes, though, you may want stylistic differences between your targets. Maybe, for example, you want to use a different font for HTML as you do for print, or you want a different heading style or something like that. And so within your style sheet, you can create mediums that apply to different target types. Now, in the example that I'm going to show you here, I had a company that wanted 4 outputs, which is kind of rare, 4 output types. They wanted an HTML site, they wanted an EPUB file, and they wanted, let me back up a little bit here. They're creating a policy and procedure manual, right? And so they had like 70 some odd policies, and they wanted all of their policies to be in an HTML site. They wanted all of their policies to be in an EPUB file. They also wanted a standalone version of each policy in PDF format and a standalone copy of each policy in Word format. Like I said, this case was somewhat rare, but it was really cool. So what did we do? Well, we went through and created a Flare topic for each policy. We then inserted those topics into a Flare TOC, right? They need to be in a TOC so you can build them for print output. And then we created the targets that I just mentioned to you, the HTML5 target, the EPUB target, PDF, and Word. And I assigned the TOC to each one of those targets. They all used the same TOC. I don't think I mentioned that earlier when I was talking TOCs and targets. You can put the same TOC in multiple targets. I then created my style sheet, and within the style sheet, I created mediums. So in my style sheet, I have default styles that are going to apply to every one of the outputs. But then I had an EPUB medium and a print medium to reset some of the default styles in these other 2 targets, right? So when I built my HTML5 target, it just applied the default styles. I don't have any HTML specific styles. I just applied the default styles to HTML. When I built the EPUB target, it applies the default styles and then applies the EPUB medium, which either overwrites the styles from the default section of the style sheet or adds new ones. And then I do the same thing with my PDF target and my Word target. I ran both of those through the print medium. I didn't need different style sheet mediums for those. And in the end, this is what we ended up with. So we had a single Flare project. We had a single copy of every single policy in our source. Every policy was just one topic. I then created multiple targets that all use those same topics because they were all in the same TOC. And in the end, we got a single consolidated HTML site. We got a single EPUB file. We got 70 standalone PDF documents and 70 standalone Word documents. Now, in this particular case, I set up the target to build 70 standalone Word documents, one for each topic. The target doesn't have to be set up that way. And in fact, this is the only case I think where I've ever done this. Usually a PDF target builds a single PDF file. And I could have set this up that way too, so that we had a single PDF file with all 70 policies in it. But that's not what this client wanted. They wanted standalone PDFs. So I had the flexibility in the Flare target to check that and say, hey, build these all standalone. And that's what we did. Same thing with Word. So that is what multi-channel publishing is. Very powerful and really, really useful, because it allows you to get more mileage out of the content that you author in Flare, because you can reuse it in multiple output formats. Okay, now I want to touch on collaborative authoring, and then I think we'll have some time for questions, I think. Collaborative authoring is the ability for multiple authors, reviewers, and editors to work together on the same content. This is really key in completing a successful doc project, because I don't know of a single doc project I've ever worked on that didn't require multiple people in some form or fashion to be working on it. And we get better results in teams generally, almost always. We may have some horror stories, but for the most part, I think we do get better results in teams. Now I'm going to talk about Madcap Central and binding to source control in this little segment. And I should say that Madcap Central provides source control capability. But you can use just a standalone source control system as well. So everything I say about source control also applies to Madcap Central, but there are some things I'll say about Madcap Central that don't apply to source control. Now, Madcap Central is a separate service. It's not included with the Flare license. You can license it separately, but it includes some really great collaborative authoring features. So let's walk through this. So let's look at a scenario where you've got a team of 3 tech writers, tech writer 1, 2, and 3, and all of you are working in the same Flare project. You may have different sections that you work on in that Flare project, but you're all working in it together, and you all need to contribute to it. Well, in this case, what you can do is you can set up a source control server or use Madcap Central to host your Flare project. And one of the tech writers, in this case, tech writer 1, would take the Flare project and bind it to the source control server. That actually takes a copy of the project and uploads it to a source control server. Some examples are Madcap Central or a Git server, which is becoming extremely common. In fact, Madcap Central uses Git as its source control, underlying source control system. One of the older ones that people tend to be migrating away from, but I still see from time to time, is Subversion. But you bind it to a source control server. The other 2 writers then clone the project from the server. And in each of these cases, this creates a link from the Flare project to the project that's on the source control server. And when one person, one writer, makes an update in their local project of the copy, local copy of the project, they then can push that change into the source controlled version, and the other writers can then see that change and can pull that change into their own projects. And so you see we've got 3 writers who are all contributing to a single project that's hosted on a server, source control server. Now, when you do this, the writers have the option, like once this is bound, by default, you're going to see a source control tab show up in Flare. If you've never used this before, you've never seen this tab. But there's a new, you would see the source control tab, and this is, I should say, I should have updated this screenshot here because this is from the old interface. There's a new, more modern interface that's really nice in Flare 2019. But you can use this source control tab to manage check-ins and checkouts and polls and commits and those sort of things from the source control server. Now, if you're already using source control and you're wondering, like, do I have to use this tab? The answer is no, you don't. You can use any third-party source control management tool like SourceTree or SmartGet or anything that you're currently using, Tortoise SVN. You can use those things to manage your source control bound project. But for people who don't want to get into that level of source control management, this is a really nice tab to have in your Flare project to be able to manage your source control this way. So having this MADCAP Central or centralized source control facilitates this collaborative authoring environment. Really, really nice. Now with MADCAP Central, it makes it really slick to manage your content reviews with authors. This is something that isn't available just in regular source control, at least not very easily. There are ways to do it, but MADCAP Central makes it really slick. So I, as the author my topics and drafts in Flare. Then, using MADCAP Central, I can send the review to my reviewer. And the reviewer gets the review, they sign on to the MADCAP Central website. They don't have to install any other software. They can sign on to the website and they can go through the content that I've authored and they can make changes or add annotations to that content. It's a lightweight editor in there. They can't do everything that I can do in Flare, but they can do enough, right, to send me feedback on what I've authored. And when they're done, they, of course, return that to me through Central, and I get a notification, hey, your review's done. And then I hop in there and I say, okay, let's check out the edits and see what they suggested, and I can review them or reject them or accept them or go get more information or whatever I need to do, right, to complete that review. And that's all managed by MADCAP Central. So not only does Central provide a source control system for you, it can also manage reviews for you in this way. It's really, really nice. There's other things that MADCAP Central does too that we're not going to get into on this call, but if these features appeal to you, it's definitely something that you want to look at to facilitate your collaborative authoring environment. All right, so in summary, we've talked about single sourcing, we've talked about multi-channel output, we've talked about collaborative authoring. I hope that this has been useful to you to go through some of this information, to look at how this works in Flare. If you're ready to go to how do I do this? Well, there are options for you, but before I jump to that, I just want to say one more thing about Flare, and that is that it's really fun to use. Like I said at the beginning, it really revitalized my personal tech writing career. Being able to use these features and functionalities, and some others too that I didn't talk about, but there's a bunch of stuff in there that just put new energy into my tech writing career, and that continues. It's been years that I've been using Flare, and I love that I get to work in it each day. I find it extremely satisfying and a fun tool to use, and that makes a difference in the quality of the output that I deliver as a tech writer. And when I work with people, I try to infuse that into them too, because I think people do better work when they're having a good time. So that is my presentation. Now, I want to turn it back over to Jen to talk about some avenues, right, where you can start learning how to do some of this stuff.
Right. Daniel, thank you. That was terrific. I hope everybody enjoyed it. Just as a reminder, there is an option to post questions in the GoToWebinar console. So if you're thinking of anything, just go ahead and drop them down. But as a reminder, if you're interested in more of the mechanics on some of these features and some of the functionality that Daniel mentioned, I would encourage you to consider taking the MADCAP Flare introductory training course. If you're brand new to Flare and all of this stuff, it's a wonderful primer. The intro course, we're going to provide this deck to everybody. It's available on our website, but we're also providing links in this slide. Can't click on it now, but when you get it, you'll be able to see it. We recorded the modules in the intro class, so if the live training schedule doesn't meet your needs or you want to do it sort of on your own, we did record it, and we make the files that you use in class and the manual available to you. And then we also offer it as a live 6-hour instructor-led web-based training about once a month. So the live training schedule is up on our website too. It's a wonderful way to get familiar with some of these and practice some of those mechanics and sort of prep you for the intermediate and also advanced courses too. So that's one resource we wanted to share. And then the other reminder for everybody is our learning conference is coming up in Dublin at the beginning of October. Daniel will be presenting there. It's a wonderful way to take your skills to the next level, network with folks who are been using Flare. You can come bring your projects to our tech support lounge and get one-on-one consulting with experts there. We still have some time through August 31st to save up to $400 on the registration. So hope you can join us there if you haven't registered already. So in the last few minutes here, we've got some good questions that are coming in. And so there's Daniel's information, so make sure you jot that down. One good question came in, and I want to, it's something that it comes up a lot. You were talking about global project linking, and I think it's a great one to reiterate. The question specifically was, will snippets be able to be used across projects? And I love that question. You talked about master pages and skins and style sheets, but maybe you could touch on that and maybe the benefits of, so the answer is yes, snippets can be used across projects, and maybe talk a little bit about that.
Yes, that is a great question. And that is one of the file types that is very commonly used in a master project as a snippet. Maybe it's a copyright statement or some legal terms or something like that that you need to put in all of your different outputs. It's very common to put snippets in a global project and then share those among child projects. Now, speaking more generally, you can share any type of file. It's not restricted. Like you can point your import file to any file or any file type in your master project and pull that into child projects. So anything can be shared.
Wonderful. And then another great question that's come in, you mentioned it, and it's, I'm not sure if you had a screenshot of it, but the question specifically was, how do you tell where and how many times a topic is used in different books or TOCs?
Yeah, good question. So what you do in your Content Explorer in Flare, you go find the topic that you're wondering about. And you right-click that topic from your Content Explorer, and you go down in the content or the context-sensitive menu there, and you select View Links. That's going to open up a really useful tool called the Link Viewer. Over on, by default, it shows up on the right side of your Flare screen. And that will show you what other TOCs that particular topic is used in. It will also show you what files link to that file, and it's going to show you what files that file links to. And so it really gives a good view of how that file is used in your project, that topic file is used in your project. So the Link Viewer, if you haven't used it before, will become one of your best friends. And that's how you get to it. Again, right-click a topic, go down and select View Links.
Great. And another great question, and I'm happy to also piggyback on this one if you have a comment, but the question specifically is, how easy is it to migrate from one source control system to MadCap Central? Does the migration preserve historical versions, etc.?
Yeah, that's a good question. I may need you to chime in on that one, Jen. I mean, it's easy to migrate. The history is the part that I'm unclear of. If you can.
I don't think that you would lose any historical information from the prior source control you were using, but I do want to point out, there's two ways you can handle source control in Central, and this may be one thing we drop in your deck, Daniel, when we send out to everybody. There's a great quick little movie on this. There's a single bound approach to MadCap Central and a dual bound approach to MadCap Central. At a very high level, the single bound approach is MadCap Central would be the primary source control system at play. You want to migrate to Central, cut the cord from your previous source control version, and that's what you're using. Another option is what's called a dual bound approach, which is maybe you're still connected to your other source control tool. You're not ready to give that up yet, or you want to use it for whatever reason. You can be primarily bound to that source control system and continue to work the way you normally would with your pushes and your pulls or your check-ins and checkouts, depending on the verbiage is a little bit different depending on the source control tool you're using. So you continue to work that way. You would have in the dual bound approach, you'd have a secondary copy of your project on Central. And the reason why you would do that is you may not be using Central. I mean, it's storing the copies of it, but having that secondary sync to Central means that you can use Central for all of the other stuff it does, like topic-based reviews in the cloud, which is really easy. Maybe you want to automate builds in Central and not purchase additional build servers to make that happen. So as long as Central can see your project, you can do all the other things. You can still do your source control with your primary system and not use Central as your primary source control tool. So that's also an option. Single bound, where Central is the only tool at play, or dual bound, where you have your primary one working and Central that's just there as a secondary. You may decide at some point to cut the cord from your primary one, and only use Central, but you don't have to necessarily give up that source control platform if you don't want to initially. Hopefully I didn't muddy that up.
No, that was great. And that gets into it was a little bit more of a source control question rather than just a pure collaborative authoring question. But absolutely, there's a lot of flexibility on how you manage your source control for sure.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
And if anybody wants to learn more about the Central side, just on a personal level, feel free to reach out to me or email sales@madcapsoftware.com. I'd be happy to talk more detail about that and how it works and show all of that fun stuff to you. But yeah, well, we're running out of time here. I'm looking at the clock. If anybody has any last minute questions, this little GoToWebinar console will be open for the next minute or so. Feel free to drop it in and reach out to us if there's any other questions that you forgot about after we end it. But with that, Daniel, I wanted to thank you. This was so helpful. I always take away little nuggets from these presentations, and I've certainly got a few, so thank you. I hope everybody enjoyed it. And we hope everybody has a great rest of the week for what's left, a good weekend, and we hope to see you on the next presentation. So thanks again. Take care, everybody.